You're the person the world needs. Life is changing, and the future is uncertain. You may not know how or why yet, but you know you're here to make a difference. You're not waiting for the universe to give you the answers. You're finding them for yourself. Challenging echoes with evidence. Few people have great ideas. Even fewer make them happen. It takes a dreamer, an explorer, a researcher, a leader, a thinker. It takes someone like you.
For you, whether that's UNSW, whether that's another institution, giving you as much information as possible to make sure you've got the opportunity to ask those nitty-gritty questions, find out exactly what it's like to be a student on our rural clinical school campuses, on our campus up here at UNSW Kensington, really getting those insights that you can make a really informed decision. And today really is that first step in that journey. As we begin, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country and acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout Australia, and acknowledge their continuing connection to land, sea and community. We recognise particularly First Nation peoples from the Bedigal, Wiradjuri, Biripi and Gumbaynggirr country, where our rural clinical school campuses are located, and we pay our respects to the elders both past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are present with us at this evening's presentation. Now look, we've got a jam-packed evening ahead of us. We'll try to finish up right on 7 o'clock. We'll make sure there's plenty of opportunity for you to throw questions our way. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end. In terms of how we'll structure this, we'll start off with Professor Tara McKenzie, our Associate Dean of Rural Health, giving us a real insight into the way we structure our medical program here at UNSW, and in particular what it's like to be doing the medical program at some of our rural clinical school campuses. I'm then going to jump back in and cover off the admission side of things, getting to some of those nitty-gritty questions around what kind of ATAR you should be aiming for, what kind of UCAT ANZ results are going to make you competitive, and also all the additional routes and avenues into studying medicine. There's many ways in which you can study medicine, many different careers where you can make a genuine impact, and we're going to cover off some of those here today. I'm then going to be joined by probably the most exciting entourage who'll be, at part of the session today, and that's three of our current students who are going to be sharing their insights and experiences about what they've been getting up to on a day-to-day basis at our rural clinical school campuses. So to give a bit of context, in terms of UNSW, who we are and where we're going, well, look, we were founded back in 1949, and that's really significant because we were founded on the back of World War II when there was a shortage of engineers and scientists in New South Wales and across Australia more broadly. Since then, though, we've expanded ourselves to have 60,000 students. We have 6 faculties that cover everything from medicine and health to arts, design and architecture, law, our business school. We still do science and we still do engineering really, really well, but we're a university that excels in many, many different areas. And in fact, we're ranked 45th in the world for medicine and health. In terms of what informs a lot of that learning that you'll be doing inside the classroom, well, it's the fact that the people you're learning from are also researchers. They're researching into, cures for cancer. They're looking at neuroscience, mental health addiction, infectious diseases. We've got a whole school of population health who have been at the forefront really of responding to the COVID-19 pandemic and crisis. And a lot of our graduates are out there working on the front line as well. And look, our medical program, the Bachelor of Medical Studies, Doctor of Medicine, which is hopefully the reason why you're here tonight, it has consistently for the last 4 years been the most in-demand degree in New South Wales. And really that's the kind of thing that you should think about, not really in terms of, look, it's a competitive program, because it is a competitive program, but there's many ways to get into it, and we'll cover those today. But really think about the fact that you're going to be part of a community who is going out there to make a real impact to people's lives. And it speaks to the teaching quality, the fact that you're going to have state-of-the-art facilities that you get access to. And from your first couple of weeks, you're going to be out there in the hospitals getting acclimatized to what it's like to be in those clinical settings, and how you'll be able to then gradually increase that throughout your time with us at UNSW Medicine and Health. So look, without any further ado, I'm actually going to welcome to the virtual stage Professor Tara McKenzie, our Associate Dean Rural Health, and she's going to cover off more of how we structure a medical program and exactly what it's like studying that at our rural clinical schools. So Tara, over to you.
Thanks very much, Nick. And if we can go to the next slide, that would be fantastic. So in terms of the University of New South Wales program, as I'm sure you know, it's a 6-year program that's divided into 3 phases. And whether you study in Kensington or study in one of our rural sites, it's the same program. So the first phase is based around biomedical and social sciences, and you can see some of the topics there that you cover. And one of the things with that phase that I'll bring your attention to is the little bit in brackets at the end, and you'll see that the first years and the second years will actually study together in the second half of the year, which I think is really exciting, because for the rest of our careers, and certainly something I'm still doing, we work with different colleagues at different levels of training, and it really gets the students used to that from a very early stage. One of the other key things about our phase 1 is that our students are actually in the hospitals from year 1, which is a very big change from some of the older courses where students didn't really enter hospital until the last 3 years. So from phase 1 and in year 1, you're actually in the hospitals, and I think that that's a really important part of the program. We then move on to the second phase, which you can see is the 3rd and the 4th year, and they're actually quite different years. So the 3rd year is really looking at integrated clinical courses around themes. It's 2 days at the university and 3 days in the hospital per week. So already you're more time in the hospital than you are at the uni, which I think is a really important factor in terms of the training at the rural clinical schools that we'll talk about. And then the 4th year, which is called the Independent Learning Project, I think that's one of the things that really sets our medical course apart from some of the others, in that it allows the student to really spend a year getting in depth into a research area of their interest, and you have the option to complete an honours project or not, but every student will have the time to really get into research. And can I say, whether you're going to specialise in general practice or specialise in neurosurgery, the ability to get some detailed research training in your medical degree is unique to UNSW's medical course, and certainly makes a very big difference down the track when you're actually working, as well as, to be honest, applying for positions later on. So I think that's a really exciting part of our course. And then goes from one exciting thing to the next, which is phase 3. That's the bit that I must admit most of the students tend to enjoy the most, and that's the bit where they really are in hospital pretty much most of the time, with some tutorials and lectures sort of scattered throughout the rural clinical schools in those areas that you can see, from medicine, surgery, psychiatry, primary care, obs and gynae, paediatrics. There's an elective term that every student does, going from 5th year to 6th year, and that really has a very wide range. And before COVID, obviously, it was an even wider range than it is now. But in the future, certainly many students travel internationally to be able to complete that elective. And then the very last part they do as a student is something we call our print term, which is where we give them a dedicated 4-week course. It's an intensive sort of update to prepare them to be interns. So if we can go to the next slide, that would be fantastic. Thank you. So we have multiple teaching sites across UNSW, the Rural Clinical School that I'll talk about in a bit more detail, obviously Kensington, which is our main campus, and then we do have metropolitan hospitals campuses across New South Wales. And if we can go to the next slide, please. So our key campuses, as you can see, are in Port Macquarie and Coffs Harbour, and then in Wagga and Albury, Wodonga, and then we have a smaller campus in Griffith. We can do phase 1, 2 and 3 in Wagga and Port Macquarie, and I'll talk about that in a bit more detail in a minute. And then we can do phases 2 and 3 in Coffs Harbour or Albury, Wodonga, and then we have phase 3 students in Griffith. You can go to the next slide, please. So look, students often ask me, why would I choose the Rural Clinical School? I think, why would you choose UNSW is easy. I think, why would you choose the Rural Clinical School? It's actually even easier. So we certainly do have state-of-the-art facilities, and in Wagga, and I'll show you a picture in a minute, there's a new building being built that will be ready by hopefully the end of 2023 that will be truly state-of-the-art. The key thing I think about the Rural Clinical School is the smaller cohorts, and so you get increased academic staff time. And so students are not a number to us, they're certainly individuals whom we get to know individually, and I think that that makes a huge difference when it comes to the Rural Clinical School. And I think the other key difference is that any of you who are regional people, you know that the doctors, the regional doctors are the lifeblood of our communities, and they are people who are very dedicated and passionate, and they're the people who are teaching our medical students, and so they're the people who bring that passion to it. If we can go to the next slide, this is the slide of the Wagga students here. This is our first cohort of first years in this year. And it's really exciting now, I think, to have the 2 campuses where we can have students spending all of their 6 years in regional medicine. And something for the parents to have a think about. If sometimes I think there can be a misconception that the Rural Clinical School might be a fun place to train, which it is, but not necessarily the best place to train. Just so you know, the last 10 years, 7 of the 10 years, the university medalist has come from a Rural Clinical School campus. So we certainly do hold our own when it comes to the academic side of things, but I genuinely think if you ask any of my beautiful students who are going to talk to you soon, they have fun learning what is a really hard 6 years, but certainly very worthwhile. So I'll hand back to Nick at this stage, and I'll be on the panel later if people have any questions.
Phenomenal. Thank you very much, Professor Mackenzie. And look, we're going to dive in now to the admissions side of things and a little bit more of that nitty gritty around how you should be applying, what you should be thinking about over the next couple of months. I can see a couple of questions have started trickling through, so keep asking them in the Q&A chat there. Again, we'll amass as many questions as we can. At the very end, we'll throw them open to our panel, so I do encourage you, throw everything in. We'll probably cover off some of them as we go through. I can see there's questions around bonded and unbonded places. We're going to cover that off right now. So in terms of the rural entry scheme and how this works, and many of you who are joining us on the call, I imagine, are going to be eligible for the rural entry scheme. So we'll talk about how you apply in general, but the key thing to note with the rural entry scheme is that you have to have lived in a defined Australian rural area, so an RRMA 3 to 7, for at least 5 consecutive or 10 cumulative years since the age of 5. The best thing you can do actually is there's a beautiful link there on the slide there that will take you straight to our rural entry scheme page, into our medicine pathways page and onto the rural entry scheme page. And this links out and we'll have an interactive map which shows you which areas fall into those categories. So if you're in those categories and you meet that criteria, then we encourage you to apply through the rural entry scheme, which is one of our special admission schemes. I'll cover up some of the other special admission schemes as we go throughout, but if we can jump to the next slide, this is actually how you apply, and this is where the rural entry scheme comes in. So hopefully all of you who are joining us, if you're in year 12, if you're in year 10 or 11, hopefully this is just a precursor to get you excited about everything that lies ahead. But for those of you who are in year 12, hopefully you've registered for the UCAT ANZ. The on-time applications closed on the 17th of May, and I believe late applications are open until the end of May. So I'd reach out to the UCAT ANZ consortium as soon as possible to make sure you secure your place in sitting that test. Now, the UCAT ANZ is an online test that you'll do, a computer-based test that you'll do, and based on your results there and your secondary schooling results, so your ATAR results, we combine that together. We then give out interviews, and then that's how you get in. But when you're actually going through that application process, the first thing really to do is sit at the UCAT ANZ, apply to UNSW directly. And I guess this is something that trips people up sometimes because they think, oh, I just apply through UAC, so through the University's Admission Centre. Well, actually for our medicine program, you've got to apply to both. So you apply through UNSW. When you go through the medicine application portal, this really is just about giving us more information about why you're passionate about and interested in studying medicine with us. It's also the option where you'll get to select the rural entry scheme as your special admission scheme. So make sure you tick that box. And also, in addition to that, it's where you'll be able to choose your campus selection. We'll talk about that in a minute. You also have to apply through UAC, so through the University's Admission Centre. Ideally, if you want to be considered, you're going to have to make sure that UNSW's medicine program is one of your preferences when it comes time for the respective offer rounds. And then you'll await your invite. And so if you're successful, we'll invite you for an interview. And really the interview is our chance to get to know you better and to tease out some of those interests and passions you have for medicine, but also to look at things like your communication skills, your critical thinking skills, and really more broadly what you're going to bring to the UNSW community, because our students are highly engaged. As Tara alluded to, it's a really fun place to be at UNSW and at our rural clinical schools, because we do strike a balance between the academic side of things and also, you know, the student experience. I'm sure our students who are going to join us on the line are going to cover more of that later on. As I mentioned, it's those three criteria. That's what we're looking for. It's your ATAR, your UCAT A and Z. We combine the two together. Then we give out interview offers based on those three factors. That's how you get into UNSW medicine. If we can jump to the next slide. So here's probably the slide that many of you have been holding out for already. It's the slide that often gets a bit of a kind of a groan from students when they go, oh, you know, the competitiveness of the program. But really, I encourage you to think the opposite. It's a competitive program because it's an incredible program, but also really make sure that you're aiming as high as you possibly can, and we'll cover off some of the other pathways into medicine a little bit later in this section. But if you're applying by the rural entry scheme, the median selection rank for students who commenced with us this year was 97.57. You're probably thinking, with the ATAR, you can't get it's a 0.5 or a 0.55. How do you get 5.7? That's just, it's because it's a median. So that's just kind of the middle score, not the actual score obviously a student got. And the lowest selection rank, remember, a selection rank is your ATAR plus any adjustment factors that you're eligible for, such as for our medicine program, the educational access scheme. That's how your selection ranking is calculated. So the ATAR plus those adjustment factors. The lowest selection rank for rural applicants was 91.35. You can see for local applicants, so that's those who are domestic students who are not applying via the rural entry scheme, but just applying straight to us. That's the scores that are there. So a median of 99.82 and the lowest selection rank of 99.5. If you're in a younger year, if you're in year 10, for example, and you're thinking about the subjects that you want to choose for year 11 and 12, we don't have any prerequisites at UNSW across any of our programs. Now, we definitely have assumed knowledge, so subjects we recommend that you take because that will give you an edge in your first year or two and help that transition from school to university, but it's not essential. So we assume that you're going to have at least a proficiency of English standard, so band 4 or higher. And again, that's the communication skills that we're really looking for that are going to help you be an excellent clinician. And we recommend that you do chemistry. If you're not doing chemistry, not the end of the world. You could do a bridging course if you wanted to. We offer bridging courses to our Faculty of Science. Also, you could just bridge that knowledge yourself through independent learning when you actually commence the course. So it kind of depends on how much knowledge you've got and what's going to be the best learning structure for you. Jumping on to the next slide, the UCAT A and Z, as I mentioned, is that other kind of key component that we're looking for to assess applicants for an interview. For those who received an offer to study with us in 2021, the median score for rural applicants was 2,746. The lowest score was 2,520. Some of you are probably at home frantically scrolling these numbers down. Don't panic. Firstly, they're on our website. You can access them anytime. And secondly, we're going to send an email out tomorrow, which will have a link to the live recording. So you can go back and if you haven't had enough of me by tomorrow, you can rewatch this time and time again. And again, hopefully you'll find the student insights more exciting than myself. The lowest percentile that we'll consider, though, and this is the big takeaway for the UCAT A and Z, is 50%. So you need to be in that top 50% of students' performance in the UCAT A and Z to be considered for an interview offer. Moving on to the next slide, the interviews themselves, we did 180 for those students who are applying through the rural entry scheme, and we did 472 for those who were applying just as domestic students, not through the rural entry scheme, so our local students. The timeline to keep in mind, this is probably the biggest takeaway really, is just that interviews for rural applicants happen a little bit earlier than those who are just domestic students who are applying as local applicants. So they happen generally in November. That's what we're anticipating for this year. If you're applying and you're not eligible for the rural entry scheme, then we're likely to be interviewing you in December. And then if you're interstate or you're overseas and you're joining us today, firstly, welcome, and we'll be interviewing you in January. The reason for that, actually, just to explain, because it's a common question we get, is the fact that students will often, if they're applying for medicine, they'll apply for medical schools in every state. And if they get an offer to a medical school in their home state, they're generally going to stay there instead of moving. So that's why interstate ones happen a bit later. No disadvantage though, we always make sure we're saving enough places for those who are applying from interstate. Now, when you go through the medicine application portal, we're going to ask you a couple of questions around your passion and interest for studying medicine. Don't feel like these need to be perfect answers. These are not assessed in any way. They, at most, are just used as prompts by our interviewers to flesh out your interests. So we'll pass them on to the interviewers when they do the interview. And I should say the interview itself is just, it's two representatives. So one from the medical community and one from the university, who are just teasing out your passion for medicine and your communication skills and critical thinking skills. When you apply for for UNSW Medicine via the medicine application portal, that's when you'll get to also throw in your campus selection. And as Tyra is mentioning, you can study the entire program, or that state set from stage one at the Port Macquarie campus, at our Wagga Wagga campus, which is the most recent addition to be able to study the entire program here at UNSW Medicine, and also our Kensington campus as well. So really our best advice is to throw your hat in the ring for every campus that you are eligible for and that you're seriously considering studying at, because it just maximizes your chances if you're putting your preference down for all of them. In terms of bonded places and unbonded places, so a bonded place is where you have a return of service, and it's a contract that you'll have with the Australian government, so with the Commonwealth. So a bonded place means that the government is sponsoring your place and that they're kind of covering, I guess, some of the costs through it being a Commonwealth supported place, but there's a return of service that you have to have, and at the moment my understanding is that it's 3-year return of service. It does change, it's changed over the last couple of years, so it's worthwhile in the year that you're applying jumping onto the bonded the Commonwealth Government's bonded website just to double check what that return of service might look like for you. Again, you'll have a contract that you'll make with the government, they will be in touch. But really, it's a return of service where you're going to be helping out in the hospital or hospitals in areas of need. And this often includes regional and rural areas, and it's designed to support the health system across Australia, and it's a really important scheme in that regards. But often we see that students who do get a bonded place and they go regional, they go and they work in rural hospitals, they, particularly when they're applying for specializations down the track, they tend to be really favourably looked upon because they've had some amazing experiences that give them that edge, particularly if they're working in hospitals of need. They've been able to show and kind of separate themselves in terms of their ethos and their commitment, and often that's looked upon very favourably if you're going down the route of further specialisation down the track. Jumping to the next slide, here's the application timeline. So this is also on the website, so don't feel like you need to scribble all of this down. Throw in that short URL at the bottom and it pumps out the application timeline. But again, the key things to keep in mind, UCAT-ANZ, you need to make sure that you're reaching out to the UCAT-ANZ consortium and registering as a late applicant as soon as possible, given you're going to lose your opportunity in another week's time. You'll set the UCAT. We encourage you to come along to the UNSW Open Day, and we'll talk about the other, the Rural Clinical School Open Days at the very end. We've got the timelines for those as well. You've got to apply by UAC. This is the on-time application deadline. You can technically apply later on through UAC, but it just gets incrementally more expensive. So I encourage you to save your time and money by applying early. You've got to make sure you've applied through the UNSW Medicine application portal by the 30th of September as well. Your ATARs will come out on the 10th of December. And again, if you're a rural applicant, you'll be sitting your interview in November. And if you're applying just as a domestic student, then we'll be interviewing you in December. Before I introduce some of our students to the virtual stage, I just wanted to cover off as well a few other common questions that we often get, particularly around the special admission schemes that we have at UNSW Medicine, and also your fallback options, the other pathways where you can really make an impact. So there's a few special admission schemes. One we've already covered, that's the rural entry scheme. We also have the Gateway Medicine Entry Scheme, which is for students from metropolitan gateway schools. So if you're joining us, but you're actually joining us from a metropolitan region, in close to Sydney, for example, I encourage you to have a look at the Gateway Medicine Entry Scheme because you may be eligible. We also have our Indigenous Entry Scheme for students of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander backgrounds. you can apply via that scheme, and you'll do a pre-medicine program, and on the basis of your performance in that pre-medicine program, that's how you can be given a place to UNSW Medicine. We also have the lateral entry scheme, and I should preface this by saying this is not a reason to choose medical science. Many of you may have heard about it, but the lateral entry scheme is where we'll take the top up to 10 students who are in their second year of the Bachelor of Medical Science at UNSW. It has to be the medical science program at UNSW. It's specifically an internal scheme. The students have to sit the UKANZ as well. So if they've sat it, 1 or 2 years before that, they're going to hopefully get very good at the test very quickly. But it's for students in their second year of medical science with us. They can apply to enter our medical program, and they do a bit of a kind of a convoluted order. They'll finish by doing an honours program, and then they'll go on to do the Doctor of Medicine program. But it's for up to 10 students, and it really is important to stress there's about 200 students who do our medical science program every year, so it's a very competitive program, but it is another pathway. So if you're thinking about medicine, you love the idea of medical research, and you're thinking, look, I want to go down this route because I want to make an impact, then it's just a perk in terms of another avenue by which you could apply to get into UNSW Medicine. Now, what happens if you don't get in via any of those special admission schemes? Well, firstly, don't panic. I can tell you I've seen many students who have come through who it's taken 4, 5, 6 years for them to get into medicine. But you know what? Those students are the ones who, through their resilience and their dedication and passion, they're the ones who can go on to become some of the best doctors out there. So really, medicine is a lifelong career, and we see that with a lot of our students. And if you've got that passion, that drive, and you know that a career in medicine and health is something you're really passionate about, then I encourage you to keep applying and know that there's many other routes out there. So one of the key options would be, if you don't get in straight away, start a degree at a university that you're interested in and that you're passionate about studying at, and do a program more than anything that you're really interested in, because if it's a degree you're interested in, you're more likely to dedicate your time and go above and beyond with your studies and that, and you're going to maximize your marks essentially. After you've done 1 year worth of full-time study, then we can actually look at your ATAR and your first year university results, and provided you've met some minimum criteria, so there are minimum mark requirements you need to meet, then we'll take the higher of the two. And in addition, so that becomes your academic mark, but in addition to that, you'll then still have to sit the UKANZ. So as I said, you'll get very good at the UCAT very quickly, or very sick of it. I'm not sure. It could be one or the other there. But you'll keep sitting the UKANZ in every subsequent year that you apply. Based on those 2 factors, then we give out interviews based on those 3 factors. That's how you get in. So you can actually keep applying for UNSW Medicine each and every year after you've started an undergraduate degree, for example. Now, if you still haven't got into medicine by the end of that, you've just completed your undergraduate degree, and you then have the option of applying to all the postgraduate medical schools that are out there, and that there's many across Australia. And you've also got the option of continuing to apply to UNSW Medicine. So really, that would be one of the most common pathways that we see. And again, we see students who, it takes them a few different attempts to, really nail the UCAT, or, to perfect their results, I guess, in terms of how they're performing academically. And the reality is that they go on to become incredible clinicians. In addition to that, there's many other ways in which you can make an impact. So if you don't get into medicine per se, but you want to work in clinical careers, you could look at things like exercise physiology, like optometry. You could look at making an impact by doing something like international public health, where you can work on solving those major health challenges that are out there, like COVID-19 and the pandemic that we're all dealing with at the moment. So there's many ways in which you could do it, going down a clinical or a non-clinical route, and it really is just about getting experience and working out which one's going to be right for you. I'll mention this now, and I'll mention it at the very end, but we're always here to have a chat and work through what is going to be the right pathway for you, what's going to be the most unique pathway that's going to help you achieve your educational goals and your career goals as well. So look, that's enough for me in terms of the admission side of things and some of those other pathways that are out there. And now I'm going to introduce again our student entourage, who we're delighted to have with us today. We've got Riley Doherty, who's our Port Medical Society president, and he'll be talking to us a little bit about the MedSoc side of things and ARC. We've also got Anton Joseph, who is one of our first-year medical students out of the Wagga Wagga campus, and Ellen Egan, who is a sixth-year medical student at our Port Macquarie and Coffs Harbour campus. So I might introduce Riley to the virtual stage, and then we'll progressively work through with some introductions before diving into the Q&A. So keep those questions coming. But until then, over to you, Riley.
Thanks, Nick. So good evening, everyone. My name is Riley and I'm one of the fifth-year medical students currently studying here at the Port Rural Clinical School. A little bit on my journey to studying medicine. So I'm originally from Bendigo in Victoria and came to Port Macquarie as part of the first intake of first-year students following a year of university in Tasmania, which is actually quite common, as Nick has already said. I was both very excited and nervous heading into my first year of uni and medicine, and especially anxious about moving away from home. However, one thing that I quickly realised was that everyone else was in the exact same boat, feeling the exact same way, and this actually made it much easier to meet friends, settle in, as everyone's here for the same reason. This, I believe, was also supported by the fact that I came to one of the rural clinical schools. They're much smaller here, a more intimate environment where everyone makes you feel extremely welcome and well supported by all of the staff, clinicians, consultants. So a bit about the student life at the rural clinical schools. As Nick mentioned, I'm currently the president of the Port Medical Society, which is a student-run society for the students. All of the other rural clinical schools also have their own student societies, and we all work to do similar things. So we run events all throughout the year for the students. These include, but aren't limited to, things such as O-Week activities, river cruises, wine tours, charity balls, beach days, barbecues, trivia nights. So there's always things going on, and there's truly social events for everyone. And everyone is always more than welcome to attend everything, and by no means are they exclusive. Additionally, we advocate on behalf of the students. We frequently liaise with the staff and the RCS faculty to ensure the well-being of the students. And the societies also assist in organising exam prep sessions, volunteering opportunities, and keeping students up to date with essentially everything's happening locally. Lastly, choosing to study at one of the rural clinical schools means smaller cohorts, smaller classes, better access to academics, as already stated, and an environment where essentially everyone knows everyone, leading to socialisation and mixing between years 1 to 6. So essentially, first years are getting in interactions with 6 years from the get-go. So thanks for listening, good luck, and I hope to see you at one of our UNSW Rural Clinical Schools.
I might throw over to Anton to do a quick introduction.
Hi, thanks, Nick. My name's Anton and I'm currently a first year medical student at the Rural Clinical School in Wagga. So currently we have 11 students, and so a bit about me was I was someone who entered the course being straight out of high school through the local entry scheme. Originally I thought I wasn't even going to get in, so I was really excited about getting the offer in the first place. I was a bit surprised about getting an offer to study at Wagga. Like when I first put in the preferences, I didn't really pay much attention to the campuses, but honestly, I can say that coming to Wagga has been so much better than my expectations. So I think the first thing that we all forget about high school is how much routine there is. Normally we have classes from 9 to 3 and we always go home after 3 o'clock. But when you get into university, that really goes out the window. Some days I finish at 6 o'clock, some days I finish at 11. So it really just depends on the day. And I think being flexible and getting used to those irregular hours was something that was really a challenge for me. I also think that moving out was something that I really stressed a lot about. I was always a dreadful cook at home, so that was something that came with practice, learning how to cook. But honestly, the people that you meet here are so lovely and supportive, especially the staff, and they always have your best interests at heart. You soon really get over that feeling of being homesick. And in terms of accommodation at Wagga, I know some students who've rented rooms close to the clinical campus, so in town, but I also know some other students like me who live in Charles Sturt University. And I think the cool thing about that is something that you get to really mingle with a wide variety of students. I know many of the kids at Charleston University are learning agriculture, and so you really get to just socialize with a wider variety of people. And I think the other thing due to COVID is that it's not as prevalent in Wagga at the moment, so we do get a much more face-to-face approach when it comes to teaching, which is really useful. And I just think it's such a tight-knit community, and so you really, whenever you have some medicine-related questions or just questions in general, you can just ask a 60. You can ask any year, and they're always open to help you. So I think being part of that community where everyone knows each other, everyone's willing to listen to you. So overall, I think my experiences at Wagga have definitely exceeded my initial expectations.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Anton. I'm going to throw over to Ellen to do an introduction as well.
Hey guys, I'm Ellen. I'm a sixth year here at Port Macquarie Clinical School. I'm originally from Cooma, which is down in southern New South Wales in the Snowy Mountains. So this has been a really nice change of weather for me moving up here. I did my first 2 years at Kensington and then my third year in Coffs Harbour. For my ILP in my fourth year, I was back in Sydney at the National Drug and Alcohol Research Centre, which is right by the Kensington campus. And then now these 2 years in Port Macquarie. I think that so far, Riley and Anton have really covered some of the most important parts about what stands out about being at a rural clinical school. As far as that transition that Anton spoke about, coming out of high school, meeting all of these new people, I think that living on campus, like Anton said, is a really good option, and you have that at all three campuses, at Kensington, at Coffs and at Port. And then the social side is you definitely don't feel like you're missing out on anything in these sort of smaller towns. Riley and MedSoc do a really good job of keeping everyone together, giving us heaps of opportunities to unwind and get to know each other a little bit better. Port Macquarie itself is a really beautiful town. It's set right on the coast. Lots of nice cafes. If you're a surfer, if you like camping, there are just so many beautiful national parks within sort of an hour's drive. I just really wanted to re-emphasize what Prof Mackenzie said about the course is really the same everywhere. So I think what you need to be considering when you're choosing your clinical school that you want to attend is where you actually want to be. And I think that for me, it's a no-brainer. The Mid-North Coast is just so beautiful and there's nowhere really that I'd rather be.
Brilliant. I think you've definitely sold me on surfing up there at the very least. So look, I'm going to welcome everybody who's been with us today back for our panel Q&A, and I can see we've got some questions trickling through. I know we've got plenty of people online, so please throw as many questions as you can at us and we'll try to cover them off. We've got plenty of time, fortunately, so keep the questions coming through in the chat. And I've got one of my colleagues here throwing the questions to us as well. I also wanted to introduce Tony Jordan. Tony's on the line with us. He is our Rural Clinical School manager. And Tony, I'm actually going to throw the first question over to you. So what kind of wellbeing and support initiatives are on offer for students who are studying at our Rural Clinical School campuses?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Appreciate it. It's a fairly extensive question, I suppose, because, and I saw one of the questions that came through on the chat earlier asked about the program, and as you've reiterated, it is the same program. It doesn't matter whether you study at Kensington or a rural campus, we have the one program. And so following on from that, we also use the same services. Kensington obviously is our main campus. We have a number of different services, whether that be at university or faculty level, and then obviously at the rural campuses themselves. So if I touch on three areas of support, if you like, and wellbeing, health, academic and social, starting with faculty, obviously we have our equity and diversity and inclusion section, and that's headed up by a manager and a wellbeing officer and also an education support administrator. So we have Mary Ann Colbert and Catherine Marley who have actually just been around all our rural campuses, talking to our students, talking to our staff about the sort of services that we can get from Kensington and the sort of support we can get whether that be in mental health, whether that be in academic or social. And then, of course, we've got Indigenous support programs that Matt Taylor heads up for us at faculty level, and Nuragili in Kensington that really run all our Indigenous program support stuff from that unit. In terms of other programs that we've instituted, one of the things that Rural has identified is, we don't have as good an access, if you like, to what students in Kensington might get in some areas. So we've implemented things like the Rural Adversity Mental Health Program partnership, and we have coordinators at each of our campuses that help students in that area. They can direct them to the right areas, the right type of support that they need. Our staff are trained in, for example, mental health training. We do that regularly and keep that up to date. At university level, obviously, we've got our student wellbeing and health section, and equitable learning services, peer support, all those sorts of things. We actually have O Week at rural campuses as well, but we also take part in different things that O Week offer at Kensington. CAPS are counselling and psychological services at Kensington. Obviously, we can access their support, the mental health support line, online support and self-help. So we've got access to all the things that Kensington students have, as well as individualised help at a local level. If I go away from that and talk about academic and the social environment, and some of Tara and some of our students have spoken about the types of things that you are on offer at rural campuses. We have a college accommodation in Port Macquarie. We have actually college style accommodation in Coffs Harbour as well. And Wagga, as you heard, they use Charles Sturt University, and many of the students actually live together in rental homes. That we support off-site rental accommodation by making contact for students with real estates, by giving them supporting letters that they are medical students with us. So look, the staff, as has been said, at each of our campuses will do everything they possibly can to make you feel at home in a rural setting. So I think from that perspective, we annex off Kensington, and we also have our own rural support systems.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Tony. I'm going to return to you in a few minutes' time, but I might bring Riley back to the fore here. So Riley, you mentioned that you began a degree before studying medicine. Can you tell us a little bit more about this and what that pathway was that you took to get into UNSW?
Yeah, sure. So in year 12, I was sort of thinking that I may have wanted to do medicine, kind of sat what was the UMAT back then, just leaving options open. I didn't perform that well myself in the UMAT, and so I kind of just decided there was other things as well that I wanted to kind of pursue. Went off to uni for a year to perform a Bachelor of Biotechnology in Medical Research, which I enjoyed. However, I think it was really in that year that I kind of decided that a lot of my friends were doing medicine, and it was, I think, like that kind of aspect that I didn't get in had really reiterated to me that that's what I wanted to do. And I think that happens with a lot of people. And I think from then it's kind of, you just put your head down. That's what I knew I wanted to do. I worked really hard, kind of working away, chipping away at getting some good grades at uni in my first year, and then kind of applied for the year following, and got offered my interview, sat the UMAT again, got offered my interview for UNSW, and kind of went from there. And I guess, I think it's already been covered a little bit, but what's really important to reiterate, I think, is that if you don't perform all that well as you were hoping in year 12, it's not the end of the world. I mean, you can go to uni, work really hard. It's a completely different environment. And uni works a lot better for some people than year 12 does. And you're able to really drag your grades up through that kind of aspect through there and have another crack and try again and get in from there. So, yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah, look, I think it definitely reiterates what we were talking before about that resilience, and that there is really always a pathway. And so, I mean, contacting our team of future student advisors and talking to the Rural Clinical School is definitely one of those first steps, particularly if you don't get in straight away this year, to really working out what pathways are available and how you can get there in the end. I'm going to throw over to Ellen the next one. So Ellen, we spoke a little bit about the independent learning project. There's something Tara mentioned. You've obviously gone through this, given you're now in your 6th year of the program. So what are some of the key benefits of this research/honours year, which is now what some students can do? They can do an honours year. So yeah, and possibly you might also share some of your experiences and your research with us as well.
Yeah, so I think the ILP is a really good chance to both dive really deep into an area of medicine that you're interested in, as well as really hone your sort of research skills and your statistics skills, which are things that I think a lot of us tend to push to the side as much as possible because they're maybe not the most exciting part of medicine. So I organised my ILP remotely. So I was up in Coffs Harbour in 3rd year and I was sending out emails looking for a supervisor, someone who had a project that I could participate in or work on. And so I was pretty lucky to make contact with NDARC and get to do a project with them in sort of public health. I was really well supported there. If anyone is interested in public health or drug and alcohol in a few years' time, it was a really supportive environment. We had sort of statisticians and people to help us get a handle on that. And I'm definitely now more confident appraising literature. If someone puts a paper in front of me and wants me to tell them, is this good or is this bad? What are the strengths and weaknesses? Should I trust what this paper is telling me? I can definitely sort of start teasing that out a bit better now, which is a huge advantage going forward in medicine. I mean, research is coming out all the time and it's so important that we can recognize what is good, important research and what is not so good and important research.
Definitely. I think it probably speaks to some of that lifelong learning, which I'm sure students are already hearing about at high school, but which is definitely something that you'll find is a key part of university. And I mean, indeed, I mean, if people are going to be operating on you, for example, you want to make sure that they're clinicians who are at the very top of their game and across all the latest literature. And hopefully that independent learning project really fosters a lot of those research skills. Anton, you're a first-year student studying at the Wagga Wagga campus. Do you want to take us through what a day in the life looks like? Just a kind of a typical day for you.
Well, it really does vary, like I mentioned before. So we normally have 2-hour lectures in the morning. And so after that, sometimes we have to go to the clinical school, and then there's sometimes like this thing called a scenario group. And so what we do in those groups are basically we discuss certain topics and there's a facilitator, but the main goal of the facilitator is sort of to just stay to the side and let us discuss concepts and just prompt discussion. We do have this thing called clinical skills, and that's when we have one of the local GPs from Gundagai comes in, and she essentially just teaches us like the communication and the etiquette of how to speak to patients and how to take a history and all those skills that we need to be doctors as we learn that things. And I think the clinical skills, we haven't actually gone into the hospitals for taking a history, but I believe we're doing that next week. So yeah, I think it's really flexible in terms of the way we approach things. There is structure, but it's also open to the way you can move around it. There's a lot of time which you can use to study, to just take a part in like the community, take social work and stuff like that. We also have like a lot of events run by the 4th years who sort of have a bit more time during their ILP year. So they were really eager to help us with our orientation activities, and also we have this thing called Friday Sports Day. So some of the 4th years have coordinated where during Fridays we have soccer, rugby, and just like touch footy during Sports Day. Yeah.
Fair enough. I mean, I think that definitely kind of speaks to what we were talking before about some of that balance that really we encourage you. And I consider this a question about scholarships, which we'll touch on a bit later. But It's that balance that, hopefully you're maintaining now in years 11 and 12 of high school, but something that's really important to make sure that you're looking after yourself and in terms of that well-being and just getting the full experience out of university. So balancing that study side of things with all the extracurriculars. To take a bit of a tangent now, though, we might dive into a few more of those admissions-based questions and then come back to the student life side of things a little bit later on. I'll take the next question, actually, so I'm going to throw this question to myself. If each section is not averaged out, this is quite an involved question. So if each section is not averaged out, meaning that to be offered a place, you must perform well in each section and can't make up for a lower performance or better performance in another section, would someone with a 91.35 ATAR and a 2,520 UCAT score be offered a place? It's a very detailed question. I do love those tricky admissions questions. Look, the reality is that it depends on the cohort. So the ATAR and the UCAT scores that we've put up there are what were the competitive and the median scores for students applying for entry into 2021. But the reality is that the cohort changes year to year. So it's a rough indication. It's a reasonably strong indication as to where you should be falling. But in terms of how the algorithm works to bring together your ATAR, your UCAT, and your interview, it's actually designed to maximize your competitiveness overall. So it's true, you can't perform poorly in one of those three criteria. So you can't have a lower I guess interview performance and really high ATAR and UCAT. You have to be performing well across all three of those factors. But the algorithm itself is designed to maximize your competitiveness. So it's not a kind of a 33% evenly weighting. It's just overall bringing all of that together. Where does that put you relative to all the other students? And as I say, I mean, those specific ATAR and UCAT scores are going to change year to year. So our best advice is to knuckle down and perform as well as you can. And really probably don't go down the route too much of comparing because obviously you get your UCAT score earlier than your ATAR if you're in year 12. Don't go kind of comparing the UCAT score too strongly, because you don't know how everyone else is performing this year. And remember that you've just got to be in that top 50% to be considered. Again, I mean, the actual UCAT that is required may be much higher than that, but to be considered, you've got to be in that top 50 percentile. So it does change year to year, and it really is about not comparing too much, but just knowing that we're going to do all of that on the back end, and we're going to maximize your competitiveness against all the other applicants to work out who are the most competitive. I'm going to throw the next question over to Tony. And Tony, this is a tripartite question, which are surely the best kinds of questions that are out there. So I'll feed this one to you progressively. The first part of this is someone who is an RRMA 7 ranked higher than someone who is an RRMA 3.
Yeah, so technically speaking, and I mean, when we're looking at assessment for rural entry, to qualify for the rural entry scheme, as we say, you've got to be between 3 and 7 and have, as you've indicated, Nick's 5 years straight or 10 cumulative over a period of time. But in terms of the RRMA, we use the Rural Remote Metropolitan Area classification. Many would know that the Department of Health have changed that and gone to different scales, but we use that simply because it is more equitable, we feel, across the rural areas. And sure, if you're in an RRMA 7, by virtue of that classification, 6 and 7 are classed as remote, and 3 to 5 are classed as rural. So you get, if I can put it in plain terms, a higher score, if you like, for that RRMA 7 score. But as you said, it goes into algorithms and it goes into assessment with a number of other factors. But technically, between 7 and 3, you'll get a slightly higher score. Yes, is the answer to that.
Excellent. And so the second part of this question, if a student's lived in more than one of those RRMA levels, is it only the most recent location, or is it the highest location that's considered? And again, we're maybe getting a bit too technical here. So if it's not possible to answer.
Yeah, so it's not really. So if they lived, for example, if I use those two categories that you just gave us, if they spent 2 years in an RRMA 3 and then moved to an RRMA 7 for the next 3 years, they would qualify because they've got 5 years straight. And how we'd calculate that score is based on each of those years being worked out individually, I suppose, in the 2 levels. But yes, they'd still certainly qualify for the scheme.
Excellent. Yeah, no, look, I think that definitely clarifies it, because there's getting into that kind of that technical area there, which I'm sure affects quite a few of the students who are on the call. And the final part of this question is, can a student applying through the rural entry scheme get offered a place at the Kensington campus?
Currently they can. So one of the things that we've heard tonight, obviously, is that we now offer the full program 1 to 6 at both Wagga Wagga and Port Macquarie. So that's roughly around 50 places. And so in the past, when all our campuses normally only did phase 2 and 3, actually everybody started at Kensington, even if you came through the rural entry scheme. All our rural entry students started for year 1 and 2 at Kensington, because we didn't offer it. And then for the phase 2 and 3, they would come back to the rural campuses. But because we're starting students now at rural campuses, it becomes more difficult to come back. So students need to be very careful about selecting. They certainly still can preference Kensington, but the truth of the matter is, if you come through the rural entry scheme, it goes on our weighting in terms of who's full and who's not. So we will fill up our quotas with rural students before they get to go to their first preferences, if it was Kensington, as an example.
Excellent. I think that definitely clarifies it for, hopefully for the students who are playing along at home and their parents and teachers who are joining us. We are in the last 5 minutes of today's session. I know there's still plenty of questions that we haven't got to yet, so I'm going to throw a question now to Tara around the interview. And we did touch on this a little bit, but in terms of the interview stage of the application process, can you elaborate a little bit upon what UNSW is looking for and what the best way is for students to be able to prepare for that interview?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So, look, I think the first thing to say is be yourself. The interview is not checking how clever you are, if I can put it that way, and it's certainly not going to ask you any sort of technical type questions. It's really assessing why you want to do medicine, why you want to be in a rural clinical school, who you are as a person, what your interests are, rather than anything specific. So if I can boldly suggest, it's an interview I would not practice for, and I mean that sincerely, because I think it's an interview where you need to come and be yourself and be genuine, because the marks and things are looked at in other components, as we've already said. And so the interview is really, as you've said, 2 people, someone from the uni, a local community member who really wants to see what you will bring to the rural campus and as a rural clinician in the future. So it's not the type of interview where you can study for it. Certainly do not go and buy any books that tell you how to do it. It really is something that you just be yourself in, is what I would suggest.
Brilliant. Yeah, look, I think it's good advice. We do get asked all the time, you know, should I be considering coaching or that? And I can tell you, I mean, the people who are, you know, interviewing, that they've been doing this for a while, and that they're also interviewing lots and lots of students. And so we can tell when, you know, students aren't as authentic as they should be. And I think your advice there is spot on, that really just be yourself, and you know, that will speak volumes. Now, as we're getting to the very end of tonight's presentation, I'm going to throw a final question to all of our presenters, and it's going to be a bit of a curveball challenge that I apologize because I haven't mentioned to any of them that we're going to do this, but in one sentence, or maybe 2 if we can stretch it, what would be your one piece of advice to students who are out there today who are considering applying for UNSW Medicine? And look, I might start with some of our current students. So Anton, as the resident first year student, I'm going to throw this over to you.
I think making sure that your motivation to be a doctor or just studying medicine, I think that's really important when you're considering choosing that as a career path. Just making sure that your motivation is what drives you forward.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we've kind of seen some of that passion come out, and realizing that it is that long career pathway, but a very rewarding one. Riley, do you want to jump in now with your piece of advice?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I kind of already touched on this a little bit before, but I think my one piece of advice would probably be, if medicine is something you really want to do and it doesn't happen this year, don't feel down. Just put your head down, work hard, and it really all does work out in the end, I guess.
Excellent. Ellen, over to you.
I have to agree with Riley. I'd say just do it. There's no harm in applying. You can always explore other things. If it doesn't pan out, just give it a crack.
Definitely, I can see the same theme coming through here. So to challenge both Tara and Tony to go down a different theme, I might throw first to Tara, and then afterwards, Tony, you can jump in with your advice as well.
Thanks, Nick. Look, I think what I would say as an alumnus myself of UNSW from a very long time ago, before most of you were probably born, I will say, and as someone who's been a practicing respiratory physician in Wagga for 15 years, what I do, I love. And what I do, as you said, it's lifelong learning. You're choosing something for the rest of your life. If it's really what you want to do, I have no regrets, and it's a very, very rewarding career to have. So I would highly, highly recommend it to anyone who's thinking about it.
And over to Tony.
Thanks, Nick. And I think, you know, I would, I'd like to just say all of those responses are spot on in terms of where I think you should be. I guess the only thing I could add to that would be to take something from what Tara said initially, and that's about the interview process, because we're talking about that rural entry scheme if you're coming through rural, and that is that, as Tara said, be yourself. What we're really looking for there is, as Tara said, we're looking for that person who actually shows a genuine interest in their rural communities, in their rural environment, why they consider themselves to be someone who might want to come back and practice rurally. So it isn't about, as Tara said, practicing for an interview, because it is very easy for people to pick up when you've done a lot of interviews, the standard stock, yeah, you've recited that answer, as against somebody who actually shows that passion. So the interview process is important, and I think you're all obviously bright students to be even considering medicine, so I'll leave that to all the other answers. But that interview process, show us who you really are and why you want to be rural.
That's a really good note to end on, I think. So it's important to note there's lots of events that are coming up over the next couple of months that can give you more of an insight, more of a taster as to what it's like to study at our rural clinical school campuses. I'm going to throw a slide up now, which covers off when our upcoming open days are. So we've got the Albury Wodonga open day in, if I'm reading this correctly, it's only 2 days time. So this is spot on, fantastic timing for all of you who are down that way near the border. So the Albury Wodonga open day, Coffs Harbour are going to be running multiple open days, and we'll be posting that on the website very shortly. Same with Port Macquarie, we'll be letting you know very soon. And Wagga Wagga is scheduled for the 1st of June from 5:30 onwards. A great opportunity though to chat with students, talk with the staff, really get some insights into what it's like to be studying on those campuses, and to be able to, you know, get some of those more nitty-gritty questions that, you know, might pop up over the next couple of weeks answered. And there's also a sausage sizzle, which is always great, so avail yourselves of that. Look, it's really important that you keep engaging with us and you know, make sure that any questions that do pop up get answered. And so please feel free to reach out to, you know, myself and my colleagues here at the Future Students Office, as well as our Rural Clinical School team, because we're all here to support you over that journey over the next couple of weeks, months, and indeed the next couple of years. Lots of information evenings coming up, lots of open days and that. And if you've got questions around those key application deadlines and dates, make sure you jump onto the websites. They're a really useful resource. And indeed, we'll be sending out an email tomorrow, which has a link to this video, so you can jump back in and watch the highlights again. But also it'll have some of those key useful links to the websites that kind of summarize everything for you in a neat little package. Lots of specific rural questions as well that came through, which I know we haven't been able to get all covered off today. So if your question hasn't been answered, don't panic, we'll definitely answer it, but reach out to our Rural Clinical School, their emails on the website there on the screen, and also reach out to our team and we'll be more than happy to help. But virtually, if you can join me in thanking all of our amazing speakers tonight. So Professor Tara McKenzie, our students Anton, Riley and Ellen, and also our school manager Tony. I think some really valuable insights there that hopefully have got you excited about what's going to happen over the next couple of months and what that journey is going to look like, as well as some of the, the admission side of things that will help clarify exactly what that route can look like. So thank you again to the students, the parents and the teachers who have joined us. And we wish you all the very best for your studies and look forward to seeing you on one of our Rural Clinical School campuses sometime very soon. All the best. Cheers.